This episode of the ITP International Teacher Podcast, Matt the Family Guy is out fishing, but I have the opportunity to talk with Tom, who lives and has been living in Japan for the last 14 years, even though he's from Nebraska. Chime in and listen to a little bit about life in Japan and something about teaching in Japan. Welcome to the International Teacher Podcast with your host, Greg, the single guy, and Matt, the family guy. We're recording episodes from around the globe to tell you about the best kept secret in education. That's right, it's teaching overseas. We're glad to have you. All right, so welcome to this episode, and I'm speaking with Tom Johnson III, and he's from Nebraska. Tom, how are you?
Fantastic. Glad to be here.
You were one of our listeners, one of our few listeners in the beginning of our shows here, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely love it.
You're currently in Japan, and you have a little bit different story than those of us that are international teachers at the main schools, I would believe, because you're doing adult education. But before we get into that, Tom, can you tell us a little bit about what led you to overseas? Because a lot of our listeners are in the States as well as overseas, but tell us a little bit about your story leading up to Japan.
Sure. So I never traveled like anywhere with growing up with my parents. Like I think I went from Nebraska to Des Moines, Iowa with my parents, is what I remember, like a 2-hour drive. My wife is Japanese and she was an exchange student at my university. We met and it was like literally love at first sight. And we were like, it'll be like 3 months. She's going back in 3 months. Well, we'll have fun, whatever. And then I proposed to her like 6 weeks later. And then, it was a whirlwind and I didn't even know anything about Japan. I was like Tokyo and Godzilla. That's what I knew. I graduated. I got a job on the JET program, which is the official English teaching program in Japan. And I moved over here on that program. Yeah.
Oh, I've heard of the JET program, but let's go back for a second. She was an exchange student at your university.
Yes.
Had she ever been to the States before?
I think in junior high school, she went to Oregon for some kind of a homestay experience.
On exchange, okay, sort of to relate a little bit. But when I was 17, I went over to Germany for a year. So I went from Wisconsin, like this little 200,000 Green Bay Packer city, to 3 million. What was her name again? Jennifer? Your wife?
Oh, my wife's name is Ida.
I'm sorry. I didn't even ask. Ida. Okay. So when she came to Nebraska, and I don't know about you, but you're from Nebraska, but what I think of is Cornhuskers. I think of corn. You guys are at a university, but she went from Japan, which is packed with people and a massive population, and then she's landing in little Nebraska. And it's great because you have that same experience. You went from Nebraska to Japan. So what a transition for you.
Yeah, it was.
I don't know what my point was. I guess I can relate to that. Not as much as maybe Matt can. I don't know if you've heard the podcast before. Matt was the most unlikely guy to ever travel outside of his little circle, in the States. It sounds like you're very much the same. You went to Japan from Nebraska. Wow. And that was years ago. So you loved it, obviously. You didn't just love your wife, but it sounds like you really like Japan too.
There was the love-hate relationship kind of aspect when I was younger, when I was in my 20s, and I wasn't aware of how immature I was at the time. There were definitely times where I was like, can I swear on this podcast?
You can do whatever you want.
I would literally say and think to myself, like, stupid fucking Japan. Why can't you be more productive? Where's my shoes and customs? It took me a whole month to get a pair of shoes because of a new immigration officer didn't believe there was actually 2 pairs in there. There was like this period after I lived there about a year. It's like the honeymoon phase that wears off when you first move abroad. Everything's brand new and sparkly. It's like it coincided with 17 problems like that would never happen. I was like, what? I learned really fast to grow up.
And that's part of travel, because these things happen. I have a friend, his name was Jim, and he was working in Honduras with me my second year overseas. Just to your point, we refer to it as getting pecked to death by ducks. all these little problems that you normally go through, they all hit at the same time if you let them build up. And they all sort of build up and they're pecking at you, pecking at you. Pretty soon, if you don't release it somehow, you're just like, get me out of here. I have to go. And the door handle's different. The person I can't understand. All I want to know is how much it costs. And I can't even understand that. Or my shoe just, went flat. I have to get my shoe repaired because I can't find the new place to buy the shoe. And all these little things add up. And at the end of the day, you might be like, oh God, this is too much. I need out of here. You're doing the same thing we are. Matt and I are traveling the world. You're doing the same thing, and you run into all of those things. But yeah, you stayed, obviously. You made it through that honeymoon period into the problem period, and you're solving problems as you go, and you love it now, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
But part of that, too, is when you go home, how do you ground yourself when you go back?
The grounding has actually evolved over time. So like the first few years, I really wanted to go back like once a year, especially around Christmas. The whole gathering of the family thing was just not there. I was living by myself for 2 years, the first 2 years. My wife and I lived in different cities. I mean, we weren't even married the first 2 years.
Right.
I would go back and basically just go, friends, family. Oh my God, I'm so happy I'm back. I'm going to buy something new that I haven't seen in Japan and just feel like I'm the American spending money I don't have. And it was always a new sparkly thing. I would ground myself by kind of spending time with friends and family at first. As time passed by, it was more like, well, there was actually a point where I was like, America's stupid. My view of the world, it's amazing how it's changed. First, it's Japan's fault. Then it was America's fault. This what's the word? This faceless entity that we call with a country. And I was like, everyone has it so easy in the States. It's so convenient. Come to Japan where you actually have to pretend to be someone else just to fit in. And I mean, it was just, it was an insane thing. So I grounded myself by buying stuff, getting in arguments, and then feel like I had some sense of control of life. And then it got to like, it's okay, we're back. We're in Omaha. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. Home is more like wherever I live. So the grounding process now is more like, hey, what's something new I can do? What's a new experience? So I did things in the state of Nebraska that I didn't even know existed as I lived longer and longer in Japan. There's a lot more to Nebraska than the town of Omaha, Nebraska, and the Cornhuskers and the corn. Yeah, it's been a hell of a trip.
I know. I feel the same way, and it sort of goes back and forth. You go through phases over time, and we're talking extended time, like years and years. After 14 for you and like 20 for me, I've gone back home now, and the grounding is almost reversed. I look forward to going back over to my life overseas because I've been there for a week and I see what people are doing, and I'm not interested in the new bar that opened up because it closed down 3 years ago next to the gas station that they changed. And you know what I mean? Or hearing about another mortgage on top of or a new vacuum cleaner. I'm like, okay, this is sort of, I have to change my stories too. You you ever feel like going home and wearing a shirt that says, yes, Japan is cool. No, I don't just teach little kids. I don't know what your t-shirt would say, but mine's basically like, no, I don't teach in a hut in the middle of Africa. They have microwaves there. Yes, I've been overseas for a while. I have this whole paragraph that I'd have to put on a t-shirt to get over that first hump of a conversation when I get back. And I have to explain myself if they find out sort of that I am overseas. I don't know about you, but when I go back, I sort of listen to a lot more conversations than I just outright tell people. And I don't just say I'm overseas. I tell people I'm out of the state. And if somebody else volunteers it, like my mom grabs a waitress and goes, he teaches in the Middle East. The lady's like, oh, wow, that's cool. And it sort of ends there. Or she might ask a bunch of questions and you're like, oh, no, not again. That same conversation.
A lot of the people I see when I go back and visit the States, they are friends who actually lived here for a while. Like the people I stayed friends with and the people I choose to go visit. I mean, it's very intentional. When I visit the States, there's like two parts. I'm going to visit these people. And then the other part is I'm just going to sit down and do nothing is like the other part. And it's absolutely awesome. Or it's like, hey, let's go check out like Best Buy. It's a local electronics store. It's still there. All right. It's one of those nostalgic things. Most of the conversations I have, now that I think about it, is it's more based on ideas rather than what I do or what people do. So we talk about how, hey, this has happened in the States. That's interesting. What do you think's going on? We kind of have like a discourse. So I don't understand what happens when you go there because I don't experience it. No one's like, hey, this is Tom. He lives in Japan. Or even when I first moved, they're like, hey, Tom's back. Cool. And so
They just move on.
Yeah. Like, okay, thanks for visiting.
Yeah. My good friends now know that I'd rather sort of warm up to it. And if I choose to say something, then open up to somebody, then they go along with it. It used to be like, oh my God, it's Greg. He just got back from Egypt. He just flew here. I have tons of stories like that. It's changed over the years, and I guess it depends on each person. I just have to wear a couple different hats. I'm almost at one point where there's a movie called Gross Point Blank, and it's with John Cusack and Joan Cusack. He's a contract killer working for the government, but he can never talk about that. So he goes back to a class reunion after 10 years in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and he introduces himself as working for Colonel Sanders. He's like, I'm a regional rep for KFC, and I just spread that recipe all over the South. And I'm thinking, I need to go back home and start doing that. Instead of going into the whole traveling, and it's hard to relate to somebody that lives in Japan unless they've actually been there. So like you said, you go back and you're going to reach out. Your family sort of now people that also have traveled. And that's who you relate to. That's the way I relate to people. Tell us a little bit about your job over there.
I spent 14 years as an English teacher at all levels, except for university. I didn't teach at university. Within local, like government schools, I was always employed by either the state or the prefecture or the city. And so I did that for 14 years. The last place I worked, I actually created basically a training session once a month. It was more like a teacher coaching, like how to communicate with coworkers when you're not good at speaking in Japanese or understanding personality types and how to communicate with people. I'd been a teacher for so long, there wasn't many new situations that would pop up. Kind of like a training seminar on how to communicate is what I created with my last employer. And then after doing that, which was fantastic, I loved doing it. It got to a point where I'm like, yeah, actually, I pat myself on the back for this. 3 years in a row, no one quit. Usually there was always one or two people who would quit for whatever reason. The English teachers in Japan tend to stay some time and then go back to whatever country they came from. No one quit for 3 years. I was like, I see what's going on here. I already had my own company, which is the other thing. I teach adults how to basically navigate the riptides of life, I guess.
You said life coach, right?
Yeah, life coach is something I do. Yeah, so I teach them and guide them for their personalized situation. Essentially, what I do is mostly with expats now. Expats at a point in life, like they left the country for a reason. Essentially, what I do is people want to have a family. They have a relationship with I call it the family of origin, who they were raised by, where there's still some tension there, some unspoken things, some like deep, deep anger and whatnot. And we get out in the air. And then once that is let out, then the person's like, oh my God, then they like magically meet either the love of their life, or they're like, oh, wait, I can wait a few years. I'm going to go off on my job. So that's the nuts and bolts of it. And in the process, I've also worked with Japanese people too. And the more I've done it, the more I've learned that despite the different cultural beliefs, there certainly are, there's customs and beliefs, it boils down to everyone's kind of same under all of the conditioning or ways we are raised up with our families and our mentors and our friends. It's like, oh, let me put it this way. I teach adults how to adult, and at the same time, they show me how to be a better teacher.
That's very dynamic how you said that. How it's actually, it's not how you set it up necessarily, but how it's formed over the time that you've put into it, right? because it's all leading up to this, your experience back with teaching, then doing all the training, and on the side also dealing with adults and Japanese also. That's a big step to help from expats to Japanese, especially. You did a teaching stint with Jet, and then you broke off and you did training for teachers as a coordinator, and you trained them how to communicate with each other. And then you also have this other thing where you're a life coach. Am I right with this? Am I following along?
Yeah. I mean, there's one detail, like the JEB program is only 5 years max. After that, I was a direct hire for a board of education. That's where I became communications coach towards the end of my tenure there. And on top of that, I became a commercial wedding priest. What that means is, which is actually, it's kind of a funny story. There are places, I guess the most common thing that might be relatable to is like the wedding resort in Hawaii. Like there's places that are designed for marriages in Hawaii that I think, I've never been there, but there's a place in the middle of a city that has a wedding chapel. It has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with spirituality.
Drive through for weddings. It sounds like Vegas.
Yeah, but it's not a drive through. It's an all day thing.
Okay. No, I don't mean to belittle it at all. I'm trying to relate to it. I've never been to Hawaii. I've never been married, and I've never.
Okay. I see.
Oh, Greg, the single guy, right?
That's right. Yeah, and Massive Family Guy.
You got into the whole idea of doing weddings, and is it specifically for expats or is it for anyone?
No, it's for anyone. It's just there's been, I think, 3 foreigners over the course of the whole time I've done it. And one person was European or American. The rest were, one was like Taiwanese and the other was from Thailand or Chinese. Everyone else is Japanese. This actually coupled with the life coach job too and the communications, I was able to observe how, like, who's in charge. We do a rehearsal before the actual wedding to make sure the ceremony goes very well. And we're in the dressing room with the bride and the groom, and the mothers and the fathers are there. And it's like, oh, this is mom's wedding. This is mom's wedding. The bride's just here. And the groom, he's always just there. I'm exaggerating. But it's how I put this. Everything I've done has been just an amazing observation of people and like who they are and how the social dynamics work. That's why I really love Japan. When I first moved here, I was like, I am going to learn why people do what they do. I did. It took some time and a lot of observations, studying, a lot of blunders. Oh, dear God.
I notice a lot more about individuals than I ever did when I was back home in Green Bay. And it sounds like you did the same thing. Your growth as far as a person, as far as an observer, has grown exponentially because you're just taking it all in. You're like a sponge. And now you're turning that around and helping other people. You've really brought all these pieces together.
I guess going back to the weddings, the best part is, which has been really cool for me, is my own development was, so I do the whole thing in Japanese. And how can I put this? So being able to, I'll put it this way. When I give the vows, I say the vows, the bride always cries. There was a firefighter couple and this woman was built I was like, damn, she would kick my ass. I was like, I would have messed. I didn't think that. I was just like, wow, she's muscular. And I do the vows and the bride will always cry, always. And the groom.
Did she cry? That firefighter?
Yeah, she did. And then the groom, that's the funny one. I feel like my heart literally gets fuzzy when I see the bride cry. I'm like, that's great. I'm glad I was able to contribute to this. And then it's hard not to laugh at the groom because he's trying so hard not to cry. I mean, he's like looking up at the ceiling, or he fidgets, and I was like, I could see the tears in his eyes and like coming out. And I'm like, it's okay, dude, you can cry. That is what I want to say. I just let him handle it.
So I have a question for you then. Have you cried at these weddings? Do you cry when you see the man cry, the woman cry? Do you just like let it flow?
Do I cry?
Or you separate yourself and just laugh at the guy?
During that moment, it's like I'm literally, this is actually a term I learned in the life coaching space. It's called holding the space. It's where people have this like we're speaking right here, they have this environment where they can just let everything out. It's safe enough. They don't have to worry about being judged. They can just be who they really are. And when I'm with the couple, I'm just smiling. I mean, my cheeks hurt because it reminds me of my own marriage and like how much in love my wife and I are. And it's great to see them starting their journey as a married couple. I'm in it, and when I can think of it 3 or 4 times where like the outside rims of my eyes, I could feel the tears starting to form. There's always a group dynamic, and there are some groups that are just all they're the criers. Like everyone there is a crier, and so with those particular groups, I'll start like tears brimming on the eyes when they're like passing the hand over, and the groom is like, I will take this, I will take care of your daughter. Those ones, I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, it's like tears of joy when I see this. And other ones, it's more like, it's cold. We are logical. We have a schedule, and make sure you take the steps just as you were told, like a mathematical precision. I mean, so sometimes I will cry if the group is a bunch of criers, and if the crowd does not cater to it as much, then I'm less likely to cry. I still do my thing like from my heart when I'm talking to them, and that's why they typically cry during the vows, because it's the most there's some powerful words in there. I'm like, wow, these are powerful Japanese words. Some of them I didn't know, and I looked them up and I was like, wow, that's I couldn't even translate that. It's just one of those things.
So let's put this in perspective, okay? If I move over to Japan and I fall in love with somebody and I want to get married, is this under the laws of Japan as far as marriage? Are you taking your culture and doing your kind of is it your kind of a wedding? I guess not just legally, but more like ceremonially wise. I'm trying to figure out what the difference between me going and get married in Wisconsin and then me being from Wisconsin in Japan, living there and getting married.
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple options actually. Christianity is not a big thing in Japan at all. I think I forgot the exact statistic, less than 1% or 0.05%.
Hence my question. Yes. Okay. So, predominantly, what is it then?
It's a combination of Shinto and Buddhism. At the wedding resorts, there are the ones I've worked at anyway. They have two options. There's the Christian ceremony, which is where I'm the priest doing a Christian style in the chapel. There's also one that there is no priest, and it's the bride and the groom themselves. They conduct it themselves, sometimes with a friend. They're putting the ceremony on for the guests. I'm the official for the Christian one.
Got it.
Yeah, even though they aren't Christian, it's really just like, hey, do you want the foreign priest guy to be part of your wedding? Do you want that novelty? It's a package thing from the sales point of view. I do my best to not just be a novelty. At first, it was kind of a novelty because it was my first time, like 3 years ago. I was like, oh, here I am marrying people. First time in my life. I'm not ordained. I'm not theologically smart. I know a few things here and there, but not. At first, it was just like, I'm here and I'm talking at the crowd, not to them. The very first wedding ceremony I did. So it's like public speaking. It literally is public speaking. And so I'm sitting there, I'm doing this in Japanese. I'm perfectly fine with Japanese. I mean, I can speak it, read it, write it, all that stuff, understand it. And it's like now people are more scared to give a speech than to die. And right. So this is what I've heard. So I get up there. Well, I'm waiting in a room, and right before they're going to start, I asked the lady in charge. I said, "Hey, I need to pee. Can I go pee?" And she's like, "No, we're going to start." She's like, "Go wait in the room." So there's like a side room I wait, and then they play the organ plays some music, then I come out. So it's a very good show. It's very entertaining. And so I'm sitting there and I have my thermos, and it's like a 2-liter big thermos. And I'm so nervous and nerve-wracking, and I have to wait roughly 10 to 15 minutes just with inside my head with all the voices going, "You can't do this. Your Japanese isn't good enough." Let me back up. because of my life coach background, I'm very aware of the voices in my head when they pop up. Most people aren't aware of them. I'm very aware when my fears come up and I hear the voice. So I'm sitting there, I'm not going crazy. I'm like, shut the hell up. And I'm like, and a natural thing when we start to fear something is we want to pee. We want to run to the bathroom and pee. And so I'm like, I have nothing to pee. And so I drank all the water and I filled my thermos up with pee. So
I like that. I love bathroom stories are always my favorite. And that's awesome. Yeah. Yes. You just didn't tell anybody and you don't drink it later, not to be gross, but you have to remember that one you don't touch for a while, right?
I sanitized it, then recycled it.
And how did it go then? You got out of there, you peed, you're feeling better, your voice is saying, I'm ready for this. Did it go without a hitch?
Well, this is my very first one. And the most important point of the wedding is to say the names correctly.
Oh, yeah.
This is what I was told later. I still don't know. I've never been given feedback about my particular, my weddings. I still have the job, so I assume people are happy with what I'm doing. And I messed up the bride's name. I mispronounced it. I knew as soon as I did it. And then after it was done, I was just told, they might complain, they might not. The whole crowd laughed. And so I'm sitting there, like I said, I talked out the crowd, not to them. That was the very, very first time. So it's like giving your very first public speech in front of roughly 100 people who you don't know, who speak a different language than your native language, and just like, So that was the first time. Different kinds of ceremonies. So that's the Christian ceremony. Like the people aren't Christian per se. Part of the script is I talk about in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So using the Christian terminology, that's the wedding I do. There's another wedding where there is no priest, there's an MC. Basically, they're just saying, so next, the bride and the groom are now going to give their message. They're basically just saying what's going to happen next. And then the bride and the groom do what they want. They're at the front. They're looking at the crowd. I learned the difference between this is people who think about, who do we want to get this wedding for? Is this for us or is it for them? Typically, people that do the Christian style wedding, which means the bride and the groom are looking at me most of the time. It's for them.
That's for them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for them. Whereas the people in general, I'm generalizing, that they're like, hey, we want to make this for our friends and family. We're together. We want to say thank you to them in this way, in the chapel. Then they face the crowd like the whole time and do their thing. Whereas after that, there's a reception where, oh my God, even for my own wedding, it's all about the guests. My wife and I walked around, we lit candles, we gave speeches, I did the toast, and I didn't eat any food. And we took pictures off. So we had like a 2-hour reception, and I ate food in the last 10 minutes. I shoveled it down. There was this amazing food. The wedding resort food is freaking amazing. And I didn't really have time to enjoy it. And what's funny about my own wedding ceremony was at the very end, the bride gives a letter to her parents, and they usually cry. It's like, I thank you for raising me. I'm sorry I was this kind of teenager kind of speech. Thank you for always being there for me. And so the groom also gives this kind of speech. I wasn't really aware of this, so I get up there, I got the mic in front of everyone. And for some reason, I had no qualms at my own wedding ceremony about being in front of everyone.
Yours, yeah.
That's more. I said to everyone, it's a very common phrase when people visit. Basically, you say, safe travels home. I said, yeah, thanks for coming and safe travels home. That's what I said. And the whole room was just laughing. People were crying. And there's a picture of my wedding album. I'm holding the mic and I was smiling. They were just, I don't know why this is funny, but this is awesome. And anyway, that's my wedding. That's my
Born for the mic, right?
Yeah,
Born for the mic. I just have to keep reminding our listeners, this is not happening in Nebraska. This is happening in Japan. If you're doing it all in Japanese, have you ever had a public blunder where you used the wrong word?
There's one particular one. When I was working as a high school teacher, and I go to different schools and do different events as the cultural organizer kind of guy. And I went to the special needs school. There's these same 20 questions every foreigner gets asked when Japanese people in general first meet them. Where are you from? When are you going back home? Can you use chopsticks? Can you eat sushi? So I got the same questions. Like, is there any food you really don't like? I love Japanese food. Like, it's amazing. I absolutely love it. At the time, the first time I had ever eaten, there's a backstory to this first. The first time I ever ate sea urchin sushi, it was at like the low tier kaiten sushi place. It's where the sushi comes around on a conveyor belt, and I ate it, and it was just like, ah. So from that moment on until recently, I was like, I don't like sea urchin. Now the word for sea urchin is very, very close to the word for poop in Japanese.
I get to see this happening.
Yeah, so I'm sitting there in a classroom. I think there was like 5 or 6 of the special needs kids, and there's like 3 teachers. And so we're sitting there. The teacher's like, well, is there any food you don't like? And I was like, what I literally said was, I said, yeah, without even thinking about it until later, I said, yeah, I really love pretty much all Japanese food. I can eat it. I don't like poop sushi. That's what I said in Japanese.
You translate. Yeah. Okay, that's cool.
The word for sea urchin is uchi, and the word for poop is unchi. So there's this in there. And so instead of saying uchi sushi, I said unchi sushi, which is poop sushi. And it's just that little syllable in there. And I was tired. I was very tired that day. I remember this. I was like, I don't want to be here. I didn't even want to go to work that day. And today's a special extra day with more prep and extra special activities for special needs kids that requires more creative thinking and more entertainment. Yeah, I was just like,
immediate laughter. Reaction was just stunning, or what happened?
No, total silence. And and I was usually there's like a typical reaction is from the States, language wise, people are like, oh, okay, or oh, that's great, or oh, I see, something like that. In Japanese, it's usually like a huh. That's the equivalent of it. It's literally someone's like, you say like, yeah, so yeah, I went to Hokkaido last week because just no plans. We just went. And they're like, oh, that's really, yeah, awesome. So there's this extra huh in there. That didn't even come. That usually comes. They're like, wow, usually they're like, oh yeah, urchin sushi. It's okay. I don't really like it either. Just total silence. And I was like, I felt the awkwardness, and I was too tired to even notice it. I noticed it, but didn't care.
Yeah.
Didn't catch it. Yeah. And then later I was like going back to my main school to finish out the day. And I was like, oh my God, I just told those teachers that I don't like poop sushi. And every year I went to that school on this special once a year English day thing. After that, I didn't go back. I never asked why. That's just what happened. I'm like, oh, well, maybe I have to. They don't want to be around the guy that doesn't even try poop sushi. Like,
maybe they felt like serving it today. We shouldn't ask him back. All right. Let's take a moment break for a little contact information. We'll be back in 5 seconds.
If you want to give us a little shout out and reach out, you can find us on Gmail at internationalteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Remember, complaints can be addressed to Greg, the single guy. And we are also on Instagram, ITP Expats. You can find us
I'm going to give you a story about living in Switzerland. And it's not about me blundering. One of my best friends, his name is Todd. So he wasn't a teacher. He found a job because his wife was a teacher, and he figured he's going to throw caution in the wind. He's just going to be like, okay, I'm going to show up and see what they can offer me. And it's very difficult to do in Switzerland. It's very difficult to do in other countries. But he was a successful guy. He could do anything, and he's got a great personality. So he just latches on and he solves problems. And the very first day, he was latched on with the old Italian guy that's in charge of maintenance at this school, this multi-million-dollar, beautiful Swiss school, TASIS it's called, the American school in Switzerland. And Todd shows up, and his very first day, he's working with Bossy, who's in charge of all this maintenance. This is the kind of guy that could fix anything with a hammer and a screwdriver. Todd knows a little bit of street Spanish from working in the States. In Missouri, he knows street Spanish from restaurants and stuff, lots of vulgar stuff, and he also wants to learn language. So he's working with a guy that only speaks Italian. He's this old guy, only speaks Italian. And this guy's up on a ladder and they're looking at fixing an air conditioner. So Todd's got his Google phone and he's got the Google Translate working. He's trying to say the difference. He's trying to find the difference between a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver. And he says, he gets this on here, and the translation is basically, I hate to bug you, but what's the difference between how do you say, the cross screwdriver or whatever it was? So he says it in Italian, and Bossy looks down at him, and he's like, what? Todd looks at it, and he looks at the Italian, and it says something like, I want to bugger you with my screwdriver. And he's like, this old man sitting, and the word bugger is British, right? But it's basically, I want to screw you with this. And Todd's like looking up at this guy. He's like, no, I love my wife. I didn't mean to say that. I'm learning Italian. But we've never forgotten that story. I love it. I love language so much because you blunder into these incidents, and he's just lucky the guy was good humored about it. Because he's up the ladder with his button in Todd's face, and Todd's like, no. Oh man, I digress. I'm taking it away, but I have to share stories like you do. I love it. Oh. What would you like to talk about now? We've gone through a plethora of things, and Japan is just this place I've never been.
I like the police stories, and I've heard some good ones listening to the podcast. So I was like, well, what have been my police experiences? First, I want to share that the most common complaint, and I only know this from expat Facebook groups, is people getting stopped and asked if their bike is registered, whether they stole it or not. So in Japan, bicycle, you have to register your bike. You have to have this it's not a license plate. It's like a license plate for a car. It's a sticker, an official sticker on your bike. And cops have a quota they have to do. And anyway, that's the number one I've seen. Never been stopped because I drive a car. I live in an area where you need a car. So mine's car related. So I was in an accident. I caused it. It was completely my fault. The guy was stopped waiting to turn. I came around a corner and I saw him too late. It was a rainy day and I hit the back of his car. Totally my fault. I hit him. I'm okay. I'm looking out the window. Well, this helps tell the kind of the thought process of dealing with a foreigner in general, I guess. I look over at the kid and I'm asking him in Japanese. I'm like, are you okay? I mean, do we need to call an ambulance? Are you okay? He's perfectly fine from what I see. And he was just kind of like, I think reeling over the thought that his car just got hit. And then he looked over at me. As I said, I observe people, body language, everything, shoulders and the big sigh. Do I really? Oh my God. Of all the people that hit me, it had to be this white looking dude. Non-Asian looking dude. I'm overgeneralizing. This is just my general thoughts on the what happened with the people interacted with. And
you were speaking Japanese with him though, right?
Yeah, of course. Yes. Anyway, it so happened we had the same insurance company. So just one guy came out from the office. That was very convenient. And then the cops came. So I had him call the police. I called the insurance office. And so the cops come out because they have to file a report. If you hit a car, if you hit anything, you have to notify the police. You have to, by law. And so they come out. They come in like this big, huge kind of like police van. There's two guys. They're sitting in the front. So I'm standing on like this sidewalk waiting for them to come so they can see where we are, because we pulled our cars off the side of the road because our cars could still be driven. And so traffic could go through. This van pulls up on the opposite side of where I'm standing. And they park. I'm watching them, just waiting to make sure they see me. One guy gets out the other side. I don't see him really. The driver, closer side to me, he looks at me and then he looks forward and I see the exact same reaction. The shoulders go up and I can see the sigh. And then he puts his hat on and steps out. And then the older policeman says, okay, you go talk to that guy. I'll talk to this guy. So I tell the police officer what happened. I said, it's totally my fault. Exactly what happened. He's like, really? You're saying it's all your fault? And I'm like, yeah, he was stopped. I hit him. he was waiting to turn. And in the police report, I wrote down in Japanese exactly what happened. I said, I was going the speed limit because it's rainy and it seemed I slipped. I saw it too late and I hit him. I wasn't paying enough attention. He looked at that and he said something to the effect of, he's like, this is absolutely amazing. Wow, your Japanese is amazing. And I was used to it by then. And this was even still like, but this is probably like 7 years ago. But even by then I just say thank you. And which everyone laughs at, because usually the trend is, oh, your Japanese is amazing. And they're like, and then they say in Japanese, like, oh, no, it's not, which is the typical humble response. And I just say, thank you with a smile, because I'm very proud of the work I put into it. They get a laugh out of it because it's not the social norm. Anyway, I digress. And so he actually wrote in the police report, I don't know the purpose of this. Perhaps someone else would see it. I told my wife, and I was like, he wrote down my name. Japanese is very good, can read, write, understand, no problem. This is in the police report. And I'm like, wow. I had been in an accident before back in the States, and there had never been mention of language ability being as part of the police report. Then again, I was not a foreigner in that area. It was my hometown. So I was just like, I told my other friends about this, and they're like, really? It's in the official police report? And I'm like, yep. So whoever sees the police report, they have to contact me. They don't have to worry. And so,
wow,
yeah,
that's official, isn't it? Man,
yeah,
you are officially fantastic in an accident situation with your Japanese.
Yeah. So.
And the guy couldn't believe that you're actually telling him the truth. Like, it's not his fault. It's actually your fault that you did it, huh?
Yeah. It was crazy or anything. It doesn't
have to be crazy. It's fascinating. In fact, I had the exact opposite happen to me, but it wasn't with a police officer. My quick story and relate to that, I'm going to piggyback off of yours. I lived in several Spanish-speaking countries, right? And I'm in Venezuela, heading out on the airplane, sitting on a small plane. And you know what they usually say to you when you're sitting in the exit row, right? Flight attendant has to explain that you're in the exit row. Are you willing to do all this, right? I'm sitting next to this older woman, and I'm sitting there, and they had put me there for the leg room because I'm taller than a lot of people are, at 6 foot even. The flight attendant comes up and she goes, I'm going to have to move you. She said this in Spanish. And I said, why do I have to move? And I'm sort of looking at the lady next. I said, this is a fine seat. I have no problem sitting here. This is all in Spanish. She said, well, I'm sorry, but you can't sit here because you don't know Spanish. Looked at her and I said, but and I looked at the lady next to me, and she looks at me and she sort of shrugs her shoulders. I looked up at the stewardess and I said, are you sure that I don't speak Spanish? And she said, no, you can't sit here. We need to have somebody that can speak Spanish so that other people can leave and exit the plane. This is all in Spanish. And I looked at her, I said, okay, since I can't speak Spanish, I'll sit somewhere else. Where would you like me to sit? And there's a whole conversation once again in Spanish. And she just goes off and she says, I'd like you to sit 2 rows back next to that other gentleman. I'm sorry, it's between 2 people, but it's safer that way. And we need someone who can speak Spanish sitting in the seat. The whole thing was in Spanish. And I just said, okay, picked up my things, walked back, sat between 2 other people. And I looked at the 2 people had watched this whole thing happen. And they just looked at me like, shrugged the shoulders. And I shrugged the shoulders. And just went, that's it. I didn't get a police report. There's no airline report saying he was very helpful and accommodating in Spanish, that he didn't speak Spanish. Stories abound. I love it. Where do you get to go travel? You and your wife probably have some favorite spots.
Yeah. So I personally myself, I love castles, and they are all over the place. Even the castle ruins some are restored, they're the embankments, and like the stone walls of like the foundation are still there in these hills in the middle of nowhere. In our local area alone, there's probably like 10 castle ruins within like a 30-minute drive of where we live. So on weekends, we'll take our kids and go there. We tend to go to more smaller towns. We've been to Tokyo, we've been to Osaka, we went to Kobe. I lived there my first 2 years. Kobe, fantastic town. It's cosmopolitan, like 1.5 million people. It's perfect. It's awesome. But before we had kids, we would take trips up into the mountains. We can go 30 minutes north and there's mountains, or we can go 20 minutes south and there's the ocean. We would go hiking to see waterfalls. There's lots of historical, what are they called? There were these 5 main roads in middle-aged Japan where people traveled on, and there were these post towns where they would spend the night. And some of those buildings are still around. They're kind of a tourist attraction for the Japanese tourist. We've been to many of them, and we spend the night at some of them in like these 200-year-old buildings, and you can like see the architecture. And as a couple, that's what we've done. When I first moved to Japan, I went to Kyoto, which used to be the capital of Japan. When I lived in Kobe, it was like an hour-and-a-half train ride. I went there 10 times. There are so many temples and shrines and castles that can be visited, and they all have their own story and legend and the local spirit.
I didn't know when you first said castles, I thought you were saying that you love to go to Germany and go through the castles, but you're talking about castles in Japan. I had no idea they had castles.
I've mentioned before, I knew nothing about Japan before I met my wife. When I met her, I actually said in total disbelief, I actually didn't believe she was from Japan. I literally said, "You're from Japan? Like, really?" Like, it was this mystical, vague land in my head that I'd seen on a map. And I'd seen Godzilla just destroy Tokyo 50 times from the VHS tapes when I was a kid.
I'm still there, man. I don't know much about it. So here I'm learning that there's castles there. Do you have rice with every meal?
Yes, I do. Pretty much.
I've learned a few things about Japan, and that's one of them, is that rice is just a staple food. It's at every meal. You might cook a pot in the morning and use it all day long. Wow, there's so much to learn. I mean, you live in a fascinating place, and there's some great international schools there too. I know there are.
But the technology thing I've noticed is that fax machines are still a big thing.
Fax machines?
Oh yeah.
Shut the door, really?
Depends on the company you work for and the place you live. I would say the technology you hear about from Japan, it's more industrial based rather than for the citizens. So, I mean, there's some amazing technology, like necessity is the mother of invention. I mean, there's if I recall roughly, there's 125 million people in roughly the size of California, and 20% of the land can be lived on. Like 80% is mountains and inactive or active volcanoes. And,
no way.
Yeah, so it's like, so I've seen some, like there are semi trucks, like the big trailers. They, like the ones in the States, I remember they only open from the back. And the ones here, they open up on the sides like a transformer, because there's just no space to actually, the places where they actually need to unload their cargo or the moving van. Like we had this path in front of our apartment building. It's like, it used to be an old rice field path, like probably like only the farmer drove on, and they never extended the road. I mean, they never made it bigger. Like one car can fit on it. And these trucks will drive down it and they'll open up the side to get the whatever out of it. And I was like, ugh, yeah.
In Switzerland, I noticed that the buses and the major lorry trucks, the big flatbed trucks they move stuff with, their back wheels turn. So when a bus is in this really tight situation, they need to be able to turn so they can actually steering on the back tires, and the same thing with the lorry trucks. So you see these guys, that's very, very narrow areas in Switzerland, just like it sounds like in Japan. Not quite that bad, but obviously they have to find a way in and out of certain situations. And there's great drivers in the States, but once I saw that, I was like, that's fascinating. And they're just little things you notice. When I was in Green Bay, I never noticed things like that. I could care less about the back of a semi-truck because they're always the same. But then you go travel the world and you start noticing the little things, right? When I go to Japan, I have to remember a couple things. I'll have to fax my marriage proposal. and if I'm unloading a truck, it's probably going to unload from either the side, the back, the top, whatever, depending on what kind of situation you're in. I love the way you observe things, because that's what it's all about overseas. There are new things around every corner, every day.
Just like there's these Japan destination social media groups. People ask like, I'm going to visit for 10 days or 14 days. What should I hit up? My personal opinion is avoid tourist areas at all costs. Visit the neighborhood that's obviously a residential area. And there's going to be some like a ramen place or some kind of small restaurant. You go inside, and that will be probably, at least from in my opinion, I prefer the quieter, subtle, where you can have a conversation kind of place, where there will be like a 70 or 75-year-old grandma and grandpa run a mom and pop shop, and they just don't care about anything. And they just let everything hang out, and they're like, whoa, you're pretty tall. There was one time there was a drunk guy who was like, he's like, oh, you're an American. Are you American? He's like, I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, your sausages is very big. I'm like, I guess so. Okay. And anyway, that's just the small little back holes, or the hole in the wall. There we go. The hole in the wall kind of place. If you can find some places like that, definitely worth a visit. I recommend visit Tokyo for like 2 days, and then visit Kyoto and Nara, which are like the historical towns. If you're on the main island of Honshu, there's 4 islands. Definitely go to Himeji, which has Himeji Castle. It's pure white. It was painted black during World War II, so it wouldn't be bombed, so that the Americans couldn't see it at night. Absolutely beautiful. I recommend just kind of wandering without a plan in the big cities and let yourself get lost. And then kind of while you purposely get lost, find a place that just kind of looks like a restaurant or a cafe and just go inside. And
you know the secret to life. That's what it is. I'd say the same thing to you about Italy. Have you ever been to Italy before?
Oh, yes, sir, I have. It was amazing.
Okay. I go to Rome for 2 days max. See the Colosseum and stuff. I did Rome in 3 days. And then the little towns around it. Right? Mm-hmm. Those little towns with the little off-beaten track, they don't even speak English a lot of times, which brings me to my next question. So my segue is, do they have to know Japanese? Are they going to walk into that little mom and pop place and get Japanese thrown at them, or is it going to be English?
In those little towns, there's the, I think this works in any culture. You learn the word for this, and you point at the menu, or you say, yeah, just learn the word for this and then point. And any human being can communicate with paper, a pencil, and draw pictures and body gestures.
Like Russian, you say "что это?" Like, what's this? What's this?
Yeah, those kind of smaller places, I would expect no English.
Just Japanese.
Just Japanese. So, for the visitor, that's kind of a tricky one. My experience was when I came here, I had an electronic dictionary, and I took it with me everywhere. I just said, hey, I'm going to be a Japanese person. That's what I decided. And I would look up the words. Yeah, bring a dictionary with you. But I believe now they're like, you can use any of the smartphones, and they have like these Google Translate or things like that where you speak into it and you can show it and it'll make sense. So
be careful with the Italian, and be careful with things like bugger though. Okay. I hate to bug you. But you had one of those little ones that looked like you had before the apps and everything. So you had an electronic dictionary. Yeah, right. You could type in the word. Yeah.
Yeah. I learned how to. Yeah, I learned how to type words in Japanese and look up kanji really, really fast.
What a rich experience it's got to be, and you embrace the language. So I think that's different for an experience that somebody goes there and says, "Hey, I'm speaking English and." Whatever, I'm going to teach in English, so I'll dabble with Japanese. But you embraced it completely, didn't you?
I remember this moment. Maybe this happens for other expats too. I haven't really had this conversation with anyone about, whenever I meet a group of like the other expats or foreigners or long-term residents that live here, when they see me after a while, they're like, oh yeah, you're Tom. You're the guy that's really good at Japanese. That's what I'm usually referred to as. There are plenty of people much better, fluent, better, and they spend more time living, breathing the language than I do now. It's just there was a period where I was just like, English out, Japanese in. And there was a point where I got my electric bill. I looked at it. I knew the word for electricity. I knew that was common. It was like everywhere. It's in the electronics store. It's the supermarket. I saw the kanji enough to recognize what it meant in the context. And I was like, this is about electricity, but I don't know what it's about. And it's in my mailbox or my mail slot. Oh my God, I'm a kid. I am a little child in this country. And in that moment, I was like, I'm going to be Japanese.
To learn the language, you have to learn the culture too. You have to find the right teacher. Is your wife your teacher or is it somebody else?
No, my teachers, I mostly did it by myself. I literally, if I was on the bus, I was reading manga or a comic book, all in Japanese. If I was taking the train to work, I would read that, or I would have I had a book for learning how to write kanji, and I would just whip it out and it was like nonstop. It was insane.
For our listeners and for me, kanji is.
Oh, my bad.
Refer to kanji. That's okay.
Kanji is the Chinese characters. So kanji originates from China. China's still, but it's the only thing they use. It's the characters that are used in China, and Japan has their own adaptation of it. They have conformed it to their language, or to the language here. It's so in English there's the alphabet A B C D E F G up to Z.
We have 26 letters and vowels. Then we have my question though is Chinese has like 3 alphabets, right? At least. And there's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of symbols in each one of their alphabets. Is kanji going to be that much too? Did they adapt even to a smaller group of characters then?
Yeah, from what I understand, China has like simplified and traditional Chinese. So they have 2 sets, and it's not that hard once you learn one to see the difference. It's like, oh, that's much easier to read. They just changed that one part. At least the way I learned it was in parts. It's literally, there's symbols there. It's a picture. You can make a story out of it. And I'll give an example. There's a kanji. It has one part that means, it looks like the kanji for 9, and it has the kanji for sun. And I was like, oh, so this kanji literally means rising sun. So I would like, oh, the sun rises at 9 o'clock as I wrote this. So I would just make a story, just backstory. In Japan itself, there's also 3 alphabets. There's the kanji, which I believe to get around in about any situation, it's good to know about, I would say 2,700 is the number that pops to mind. And then there's an alphabet of hiragana, which is for Japanese words, and then katakana, which is strictly for foreign words that were brought into the Japanese language. It makes it really easy to understand. Oh, that's a loan word from another language, like the word
computer, right?
Yeah, like computer. Yeah, it'll be in katakana, that alphabet. Fortunately, those are 48 phonetic symbols. They're phonetic. So you look at the symbol and you can pronounce it. If you understand English, you are gifted. You are blessed. Oh my God, that is a hard language once I...
No kidding.
Yeah.
D-O and G-O. Do and go. What?
Yeah.
Tell me difference. Why?
And the word oil, the word oil without context, canola oil, the oil in the drum, the oil in the car,
right.
Massage oil.
We can go linguistic here, man. I love it. I think linguistics is fascinating, but there's a lot for you to learn. That's great that you've embraced all of that reading, writing, and the conversational. Okay, your kids, you have kids at home, and let's just do a little bit of this. Do you speak English or do you speak Japanese at home with your kids?
This is or once both. Again is an evolution of the process.
Yes.
With my oldest, I have 2 kids. My oldest daughter was just all English all the time. And she naturally, growing up in Japan, she would speak Japanese more often. So I would take her for walks. This was the gift. Even though learning a language seems difficult in the moment or anything in life, there's always a gift at the end. And this came to fruition 10 years later. So I intensely learned the language. And then my daughter was speaking in Japanese. She'd say, oh, look, there's some trash over there. How about you go pick it up in Japanese? And I would say, oh, you want me to go pick up the trash? Can you say, go, Daddy, pick up the trash? And she'd say, Daddy, pick up the trash. So I did that with her for probably 3 years. And now she's almost 5. And I use a combination of the both. It's mostly English. Whenever I play, playing characters with kids, especially if they like characters, it kind of gets them to do the things you want them to do. Kids don't want
True.
Kids don't do what you want them to do. They do sometimes, and so I'll pretend to be one of the scary characters, like one of the cartoon characters, and be like, "Ah, I'm the villain. If you don't do this, I'm gonna win or eat you." And she's like, "Ah!" But she knows I'm pretending. However, if I did it in English, because she doesn't really watch that much, she doesn't watch much TV anyway. But the shows that we watch together in Japanese cartoons, I'll be like, I'm that character. That's when the Japanese really shine, especially when we go to parks. I do the same thing with the other kids. This is just me. A lot of parents kind of stand around the edge, like the perimeter guard of the park, and their kids play and jumping down. I'm straight up in there pretending like, okay, we're opening up the okonomiyaki store today, or the sushi store. How many? This is what teaching English in elementary school taught me. And I was like, how many customers do we have today? I'll just play the role, and I'll pretend I'm going to open the store and close it. So that's my oldest daughter. Currently, my youngest daughter, who's a baby, it's all English. So it'll probably be the same process.
I have a friend named Chris Irvin. He's living in China right now. He was teaching in Venezuela. He's married to a Venezuelan mama. They have 2 boys and wonderful family. Like when I moved there, it's like their family, his in-laws adopted me and took me around. It was just amazing. And so did Chris, and so did Ama. One of my favorite things that I observed and we talked about as a family for him being bilingual is when I asked him, I said, what do you speak with your kids? Do you speak Spanish or do you speak English? And now, of course, it would go, do you speak Mandarin or do you speak Spanish or English? Chris told me this very fascinating observation. He said, listen, Greg, we speak both languages at home. You know, Ama speaks a lot of Spanish with them. The grandparents speak Spanish with them all the time. They speak English at school, and I speak English with them a lot. Well, it's more like Canadian, eh? But here's the point, though, that I've always taken away, I've never forgotten, is that he said, if you want to learn what language a kid speaks, their main language, you let them just go and play, and you just observe. Like do a little Montessori thing. You just sort of hover around and just watch the kids play. So if you watched your 2 kids play, what do you think they'd play in, Japanese or in English?
My oldest daughter would play in Japanese. And the baby's only
fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. She would play in Japanese, and that's what she does most for playing in. The baby, I'm not sure yet. Yeah.
And that's why I shared that with you, because Chris just opened up a whole new way. Because I observe kids all the time as the elementary teacher. As a specialist, I have kids coming in and out of my classroom. I am all over the place. And that brings up one good point too. How do you say chicken in Japanese? If I see a chicken standing right there, not the chicken you eat, but there's the animal right there, the chicken.
Niwatori.
Can you say that again?
Niwatori.
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 Niwatori. Tori. I'll listen to that. See, it's a difficult language. Yeah. I'm only going to ask you that because the elementary kids know me as Mr. Chicken. And that's because I taught 3-year-olds in a computer lab, and they could never say my name, but I always logged in with the username Chicken. And the kids sort of called me Chicken one time, and it just exploded. And now when I say I'm Mr. Chicken, the kids laugh for like 5 minutes. Have you ever had a classroom full of 3-year-olds laughing for 15 minutes? Because that's how long the very first time happened. 15 minutes. I was like not even teaching. I'm just like rolling on the floor on the carpet with the kids, just going, Mr. Chicken. Yeah, no, really. They were laughing for the longest time. I didn't even teach that day. I was just introducing myself. They loved it. So thank you for the word. I'll listen to the recording later and practice it for next time. Okay. So your 2 kids speak English and Japanese. Are you going to ever leave Japan? Do you think you'll bring your family back to the States at some point?
The current plan is to visit a couple places and then move back within the next year or so. For how long? The details haven't been hammered out yet. We're just, it's not so much, we want to live in the States or we want to get out of Japan. It's more like we as a family, we want to travel and visit people in different places and have new experiences. what the long-term future holds, we're still deciding. I got one stable place for the kids to grow up in, and right now we're in the transition.
Yeah, that's a difficult one for families overseas, because especially if you're a multicultural couple that has kids, right? If she's Japanese, originally Japanese, and you're Nebraskan, and it's difficult. And Matt and I've talked about this with other people on this podcast, is that the families, at some point, you want your kids to have a grounding, because they need to have an identification. And, are they going to grow up feeling this or feeling that, or an amalgam of it, and having an identity of many different sources, right? Like third culture kids have. I would never ask you your long-term plan for that. As you know, living overseas, even after living in Japan for so long in the same area, I would imagine that you don't plan that far ahead for things, because every day I plan something, it changes the next day.
Yeah.
And it's not, no matter when, it doesn't matter. You plan something and it changes right away. It's not like I've been living in Green Bay for the last 20 years. I think everything would have stood still sort of in Green Bay for me. And that's part of the draw of living overseas and traveling, going back to the States, maybe live there for a little bit, have the kids grow up a little bit there, maybe go to a U.S. college or something like that. There's so many options for you. And I would never ask you to nail that down during a podcast. You can look back on this. You can look back on this podcast and listen to it in 20 years and go, exactly, man, that's exactly what happened.
Still don't know 20 years later.
Yeah, you never know. This is eternal. It could be.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's wrap this up then.
I have one story that just absolutely made my day once I realized what happened. Because a friend told me, I didn't realize what had happened. My wife and I were living in an apartment, and there was a nearby supermarket. And I would go there once in a while. And at the cashier, there was this woman, looked like a maybe college-age girl. Typically, the register interaction is you put your stuff and the person at the register scans it. There's literally a script. You can actually see the script at the cash register so they have like the whatever, I forgot the exact word, like in training or whatever, a little badge,
like a little name badge that says trainee on it.
Yeah. There's a script and you can see it, and like part of it's highlighted. Make sure you say this, and it's all scripted. So there's not much of a human element there. In that case, that's the quote unquote norm. Of exceptions, of course. And this whatever girl just like smiled at me and started asking me questions, and I'm like, I was kind of startled when it first happened. Just asking me just random questions. I'm like, nothing like the weather, just small talk. And I was like, and this continued on for X amount of time. I would get things like, it would cost extra money to get a plastic bag. Generally in Japan, you have to pay more money if you want a plastic bag. Having your own eco bag, your economy bag, is more of the general way of doing things. Anyway, I would always get these bags for free. I never asked, I didn't think about it. And then one day, I went to that store to get some flowers for my wife. I get the flowers. The girl's there. I didn't always talk to her. I didn't purposely meet her. Just when we happened to talk, it was always interesting, because it's like, oh, conversation with the register. When does that happen?
The off-script girl. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm at the next lane over, and I look over, and oh my God, the look of like just. It was like this inner turmoil, like anger just seething out on the quote unquote stoic face. Actually, faces are most often quite stoic relative to other countries that are more emotionally expressive in front of other people. Once again, I'm generalizing. There's usually a look on the face that's just there, and in the work environment especially. And
so you went to a different lane, and the talkative off-script trainee was over in the next lane. You had flowers for your wife, right?
Yeah. So
am I getting it right? Okay.
Yes. So yeah. Oh, she wasn't a trainee per se.
Okay.
And so I just look over, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. Usually she's kind of smiling and whatnot. So anyway, I get the flowers, I give them to my wife. I come back to the supermarket, I don't know, a week later or something like that. I go to her lane. It's open. No conversation. Just feel the wall. There was like a wall that was put up between us. And then I was charged for the plastic bag I got. I was like, that was different. So I told my friend, the story I told you. And he's like, you know, you had a girlfriend and you just ruined her fantasy.
Exactly. She was after you and you just ruined it for her.
Yeah. So that's
what a great.
Yeah.
Oh, things don't like that don't happen to me right now. I mean, seriously, I'm the single guy. I got to move to Japan. I'll go with the stoic face if I have to. Come on. The bags, man, that's normal. There's a lot of places in Europe, especially when you go to Europe, go there and you'll see the plastic bags all the time. It's charged. You take your eco bag. Germans too. You bring your own bag to the grocery store. They may not even have bags anymore. I think California is going that way too, right? You know, you have to bring your own bag. That's the way it should be. Are they very environmentally friendly?
Yes. The place I grew up in, there was no really sorting of trash. You put it all in one big bin. There's recycling bins now, and there's like a truck that drives around, I guess, once a week to pick it up for like glass and paper. However, this area where I live in, each area is different throughout the country. Each neighborhood has their own neighborhood association, and you have the old guys to make sure you sort your trash properly. The city has I think it's like 80 pages. There's a guide on how to handle trash in the city. You separate it. There's 3 places if you want to take it by yourself. Some things just you can't put into the community garbage area. And it's like, it has to be this size and it has to, oh yeah.
Regulations, huh?
Regulations are like through the roof compared to the neighborhood I grew up in. Yeah.
Wow. And I could continue talking to you for hours. I mean, Switzerland's like that too. There's a woman who got a $10,000 fine for throwing trash away the wrong way in Switzerland, but that's a whole nother bag. Yeah, it's a whole nother bag of worms there. I appreciate you coming on this show. I've had so much fun speaking with you and didn't know what to expect when we first connected. Thank you so much for being on this show though, Tom. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I was very happy to get I was like, hey, I'd like to be a guest on here. These are cool guys. And I was like, here's my thing. We can talk about this stuff. And you're like, sure. I'm like, awesome. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
I appreciate it. I tell you, one thing I'm going to take away from your show is definitely that learning the language is how it opens up your world when you go and live somewhere else, whether it's just a little bit of the language or fully embracing the language and staying there for a number of years. When you attack that language and make it part of your life, yeah,
definitely.
Okay. That's what I'm taking away, and I'm going to have to say goodbye, but thank you so much for being on our show.
Thanks for having me.